in Masechet Zevachim is Daf Chaf Aleph 21, and we are not at exactly the top. We're on Daf Chaf Amud Bet. We are 4 lines from the bottom. So the question we asked yesterday, which was a continuation of many questions about the Kior, was exactly 4 lines from the bottom. I'll give Miriam a minute to join. Good morning, Miriam. We're just getting started. 4 lines from the bottom of Daf Chaf Amud Bet. Toshma. We have a Braita, and we quoted this Braita yesterday. Para. What is the procedure for the para aduma? So Rabbi Chia Rabbi Yosef Amar, Rabbi Chia Yosef said, Mikadesh b'kli sharet bifnim, that the Kohen who's part of the para aduma washes his
His whole
hands.
system shut down.
You
And he
can't hear
said
me?
something about a message. I didn't get any message. I don't know what he's talking about.
Oh, you can't see me. Oh, there we go. Can you see me now? Okay,
No, I
perfect.
don't see anything. I don't hear anything.
Well, I don't know what to say, Ken. Maybe restart.
Now I hear you. The whole system shut down before.
Okay, well,
There's something about a message. I didn't get any
there
messages.
was a message I sent on the WhatsApp group that on Sukkot, on Tuesday and Wednesday, we're going to meet in person on Chag, 1 hour before Mincha at HIR.
What time was that message sent?
I sent it on Friday around 3 p.m. So says the Gemara today, 4 lines from the bottom, Tashma. Let us try to prove about the question of Tuma and whether a person who becomes Tameh needs to wash their hands again from the Kior for Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Para. What was the bright to say the halacha is about para? Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef, 3 lines from the bottom says, Mikadesh b'kli sharei bifnim. The Kohen is doing the para, goes inside the Beit HaMikdash. He washes his hands in a kli sharet or the kior, which is a kli sharet. But remember, we said yesterday, you don't have to use the kior. If you don't use the kior, you can use any kli that's a kli sharet with water and pour it on your hands. So he does, and his feet. He does that v'yotzei, and he goes out and leaves the azar to do the para. Rabbi Yochanan says, no need to do that. Afila b'chutz, you can even do that outside. You don't have to go inside. Afila b'kli chol, you don't have to use a kli sharet. It can be a regular washing cup. Afila b'mikedah shel cheres, even a little piece of pottery of cheres, doesn't have to be anything special. So now the problem with para is hapara at the top of Daf Chaf Amud Aleph at the top line. Remember that the person who does the para duma after they do kiddush yadayim reglaim, we make them tamei. Ditznan, as the Mishnah says, the very important Mishnah in para, mitamin hayuat kohanim asarei v'tapara. They would add the kohanim who were the ones who burned the para duma for the ashes. We would make them tamei umatbilinotan, and then we would put them in a mikvah. And the reason we did that was the hotzian miliban shel tzedukim. It's to go show that we specifically don't go like the tzedukim. Shayu omrim, the tzedukim said that it has to be done with people who the sun has set on them, meaning they became tamei and then they became purified. We hold, the chachamim, or the whatever you call it, the prushim, hold that you don't need that. And so we would specifically make the person tamei, then put him in a mikvah, and then not wait till the sunset. But if kiddush yadayim v'raglayim becomes pasul when you become tamei, then you have to go back and do it again. So what did you gain by doing kiddush yadayim v'raglayim? So shema mina lo pasul be tuma. Right? You see from here that tuma does not pasul kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. And answers the Gemara the same answer we gave yesterday when we asked the question about leaving from the same source. Shani para, a para is different because a para really, remember, a para is not really a carbon. It's full yom lo pasul ba, right? A full yom is not pasul, right? Or some would say the Chita has the gersa the opposite. Full yom kasher ba, right? So therefore, tuma also is not pasul ba. So then, if that's true, the hachi lama li de mikadesh. So why'd you even do it? Right? If it's not a real kiddush yadayim reglaim and it's not following the regular rules, what's the purpose? And we said, like yesterday, ke'ein avodah be'inan. We want to make it a simulation like avodah, and so we try to do all of the things that are similar to the regular karban, even though they're not necessary. So that was the answer we gave yesterday, and we give it again today. Ask the Gemara now the second question for today, which is a new one. Ibailu. They asked the question, Ma'u l'kadesh yadav ragav b'kior. What if they're out of cups, right? Can you stick your hands and your feet into the kior? Now, obviously, sticking your hands into the kior is very doable. There's a lot of discussion about how you stick your feet into the kior because, right, it's not exactly a swimming pool, right? So whatever it is, but these are obviously theoretical questions, right? So can you be mekadesh yadav v'raglav in the kior instead of using a cup or a kli sharet or a spigot, which is what it was? They turn on the spigot and they put their hands and feet under it. Can you just dip them in? So do you say, remember the pasuk says, that the Aaron and his sons are yirchatzu mimenu. They wash from it, which implies it has to not be in it. It has to be separated. So do you say mimenu amarachmana? From it, velo betocho, and not in it? Otama, no, mimenu doesn't really mean that. Mimenu just means using the kior. Afilo betocho. So that was the question. So says the Gemara, well, let's try to prove it from a case. And we've had many cases that quoted yesterday that might be proof. So Amr of Nachman bar Yitzchak Tashma, come and learn from the Braita that we quoted yesterday. The Braita we quoted yesterday was you had a Kohen who we said who became Tameh, right? And Kohen who did not do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So then we said, well, he can go into the Azara and he can get any Kli Sharet and pour it in. But what if he didn't do that and he washed his hands outside, or he washed his hands with the Kli Chol? Oh, said the Braita, now we're quoting, Shetava b'mei ma'ara. He put his hands into a mikvah, basically, a water from a pit, a cave, right? Which is a mikvah. V'avad avadato psula. So what does that imply? That the reason it's puzzle is because it was done into any regular mikvah. But if you stick your hands, obviously when you put your hands in a mikvah, you're not picking up the mikvah and pouring it on your hands. So the fact is, it's puzzle in that case, but that's because it's not the kior. If it had been the kior in a fashion similar to the mei ma'ara, meaning you stuck your hands and feet into the kior, it would the implication would be that would be fine. That in fact you can actually, instead of pouring the water, you can dip into the water. Lo, says Gemara, that's not a good proof because it's stricha. We need mei ma'ara stricha. We need to tell you the case of mei ma'ara specifically, and the reason we need to tell you the case of mei ma'ara specifically, sorry, I keep losing my place here, is for another reason. Shelo tomar, because you might have thought, wait 1 second. Remember, a mikvah. Remember, the kior was not a mikvah. Just to remind you, the kior was water that you poured from the sink, right? You took regular water, you put it into the kior. It was not mikvah water. It was not rainwater. It was sink water. So you might have thought that a mikvah is different because kol gufo, don't say kol gufo tovel behem, right? You can put your whole body. Let's say you become tamei, tumat mate, or whatever, tumat sheretz. You can put your whole body and become tahar in the mikvah. So yadav raglav l'kol shegen. You might think for sure your hands and your feet. The chiddush is that a mikvah is not good for kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, right? But it doesn't prove to us that a kior like a mikvah would be kosher. So we don't have a resolution, and we don't solve that. So we leave a lot of these questions open. I apologize for the openness. That's the Gemara's does. Says the Gemara now, a very complex idea, and I'm going to try to simplify it, but stop me if it's not clear enough. And the issue that we have now, we're around a little more than halfway down at Amr B'chir Bar Yosef. So says Rav Bar Yosef, and we'll see Rav Chisda is going to argue with him about this in a second, which is that there are really two categories of work done in the Beit HaMikdash. Now, there's many more, but let's break it down to two. There are what are called matirim. Matirim mean essential parts. Matir literally means permitting something or allowing something to happen. When a person brings the karban, there are certain things that have to be done for the karban to be kosher. The blood has to be put on the mizbeach, right? That's the main one. With the mincha, you have to put the komets on the mizbeach. Once you do that, as we said before, if the rest of it gets lost, it's still a kosher karban, right? So the main thing are what are called the matirim, which is generally the blood. There are other things, but mainly the blood, right? All of the matirim on the mizbeach have to be done during the day. So if a person checks a karban 5 minutes before shkia, and they're mixing the blood so it doesn't congeal, and then it gets dark, and they want to pour the blood, that karban is puzzle. Even though you're allowed to eat the karban at night, or the karban is not puzzle overnight, you can't do matirim at night. Okay, the essential permitting parts of a karban have to be done during the day. Obviously, there were many other things that were done after the matirim, and the main one was burning the animal, right? And burning the animal took many hours. It was a big animal. They had to cut it up and separate it and put it on the mizbeach. And they spent a good deal of the night doing that kind of work, right? Which can be done all night long. So what Rabbi Chia Bar Yossi says is that when a Kohen, remember the Kiyar we're saying is only good for, it might become puzzle with Lina, right? Overnight. But says Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef, there's not just one psul of lina when you wake up the next morning. If you're doing avodah that was done during the day, you have to use a kior that was kosher during the day. So let me read it inside. It says Rabbi Chia, me kior, the water of the kior, nifsalin the matirim kimatirim. It becomes puzzle for matirim at the time that you use matirim. What that means is that if you have a kior and you're using it for a kohen to wash to go sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach, if that kior was left exposed when the sun set, right? Let's say you had the kiyar out, the sunset, 2 hours after sunset, you put the kiyar underground, remember? Then the problem is that the next day, that water in that kiyar will not be usable for the Kohen who wants to do matirim. Because after the time of the matirim, the water of the kiyar was exposed and it became pasul. So the time that matters is sunset for a Kohen doing matirim. But a Kohen is doing le'evarim, Kohen is burning the limbs, which can be done all night long until the next morning. Then the water of the kiyar is pasul ke'evarim. So
Okay,
meaning,
sorry. I
yeah.
just was going to ask, what kind of water is it that they used?
So it was regular water. So it's not a mikvah, right? They would just take,
Right, I just wanted to clarify that.
yeah, so they would just take regular water. The problem was once the water became pasul, you can't use it anymore, right? So
Right, but it's not like they had to wait for like, like
right. No, they didn't have to, but
like
they'd have to empty it out and fill it. And remember we said yesterday, and this is really important, that you don't need to use the kior to do your kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. It was very convenient. But if you let's say that so basically what would happen in this telling is that they would take the kior, they would use it all day long. They forgot to put it down at sunset, so it was exposed for 2 hours of the night. So then they would put a sticker on the kior and say, from now on, this kior can only be used for people doing evarim, right? The next morning, if they didn't empty the kiyar and replace it, the water in that kiyar is pasul for those doing matirim, which gets very confusing, of course, right? Some kohanim can use it, some can't. So obviously that's a very confusing thing, but that is Rabbi Chia bar Yosef's halacha. And Rav Chisda says, that's really crazy, says Rav Chisda, or not crazy, but it's wrong. Af lematirim, even for a kohen who's doing matirim, meaning a kohen who's doing avodah of burning the blood, of sprinkling the blood and things like that, ein nifsalin ela b'amud hashachar. The only time the water in the kiyar becomes pasul with lina is the next morning ke'evarim, like someone doing evarim, meaning there's one time, and the one time is the morning, right? And if it's exposed when the morning starts, it's lina, throw away all that water and fill it up again. If it was put underground, remember you had the whole underground question, then as long as it was put underground before Amud HaShachar, you could pick it up the next day and you could use it for anything you want to use it for. So that was Reb Chisda's opinion. And Reb Yochanan says, now we're not sure yet if Reb Yochanan's the third opinion, Reb Yochanan says, kior, kivan sheshik'u shuv ein ma'aleo. The kior, once you put it underground, you never pull it back up. And what we think that means is that if you go like the first opinion, or like any opinion, and at Shkia in the evening, you take the kior and put it underground, so you make it basically no longer the kior, you make it part of the ground, then you're not allowed to pick it up during the night and put it back down, right? Meaning you have to wait till the next day and then pick it up again the next morning. If you pick it up during the night, it might become pasul. Now that sounds a lot like the first opinion, and we're going to ask that in a second. Says the Gemara, so what does this all imply? L'meimra, what this applies, according to really the last opinion, is Rabbi Yochanan, is dila avodat laila nami lo chazi, that you can't use the kior for avodat laila if it was exposed overnight, right? Meaning, if you, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you have to put it down before it gets dark, and once you put it down, don't pick it back up, which implies that if, let's say, you either didn't put it down or you put it down and picked it back up, and you said, well, I'm not going to use it for the avodah of the day, the matirim. I'm only going to use it for the avodah of night. It also doesn't work. However, we had a statement yesterday. Amar Reb Asi, this is one of our statements from Ilfa yesterday. Amar Reb Asi, Amar Reb Yochanan Mishmei de Ilfa. Remember, Reb Asi was quoted as saying in the name of Ilfa, or 4 lines from the bottom, that kior, if you have a kior, shelo shikomi ba'erev, you forgot to put it down before the night happened. Says Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Ilfa, mikadesh mimenu lavodat laila. You can use it for avodat laila. And lamachar inu mikadesh, but don't use it the next day. And we think right now that means that by the next morning it becomes pasul, but you can use it overnight. So when Rabbi Yochanan said, once the kior went down, you can't pick it back up, we think that means you put the kior down at sunset, you can't take it up all night long. But now he's saying very clearly, in the name of Ilfa, that if you have a kior and you forgot to put it down before it got dark, you can use it all night long. Says Gemara, you're right. That is halacha of Rabbi Yochanan. When we said Eino Mahaleo, what he meant was, my Eino Mahaleo, that once the kiyar is put down, don't pick it back up. It means because then you can't use it the next day. My Eino Mahaleo dika'amar, nami dika'amar, lavodat yom. That if the kiyar is exposed at night, you can't use it for the avodah of the day. But avodat laila chazi, but it would be a problem for the night. Says Gemara, well, Yachi Hain Rabbi Chia bar Yosef. Well, then that is Rabbi Chia bar Yosef. because that was the opinion of Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef, which is that a kiyar that was exposed at night, when it's pasul, when you're not able to do avodat matirim, cannot be used for a kohen who needs to do avodat matirim. So Rabbi Yochanan is basically just repeating what Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef said. So why do you need to say the same thing twice? Turn the page to Chaf Alpha and Bet. Says the Gemara, Ika Beinayo. There's a big difference between them, and that is a gzerat shikua. Is there a gzera midrabanan that you're supposed to put it underground, right? Meaning, what that means is really lahalacha. Maybe they actually agree, right? Because what Rabbi Yochanan agrees, like Rabbi Chia, that if you have the kiyar exposed at night, it becomes pasul for day avodot. But the difference between it is Rabbi Chia says, that's fine. Let's say you got a lot of Kohanim showing up at night and you want to use your kiyar at night, leave it open all night long, let all the Kohanim do it. The next morning it'll be pasul, right? But you'll deal with it. The next morning you'll empty it out and you'll fill it up again. Rabbi Yochanan says, we don't believe that's a good idea. Rabbi Yochanan says there's a gzera midrabanan, right? That you should put it down before sunset. And the reason for that is that if you don't put it down before the next morning, it's going to become pasul completely, right? And we don't want that to happen. So we make a gzera that you should do it in the evening when, of course, people are awake, and in the afternoon, meaning right before sunset, when everyone's around, and you're not supposed to take it out. Rabbi Chia says, I don't really care. We trust the people. If they want to take it out, let them take it out. And Rabbi Yochanan is basically just saying, don't do it. And actually, this is very interesting in Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan doesn't say anything about pasul or kosher, right? He's not referring to the machloket of Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef and Rav Chisda. He's just saying there's a gzera midrabanan that you're supposed to put the kiyar down before the sun sets and keep it down all night long. That's what we think it means. Gzerat shikua. Says the Gemara, okay, but what about the next statement of Rabbi Yochanan? Again, we quoted all of these yesterday. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan, now we're at the second line of Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Bet. Remember, Rabbi Yochanan had a whole story yesterday where a Kohen shows up in the morning to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. And if you recall, sorry, to do Trumat HaDeshen. Remember, the Trumat HaDeshen was the first step of the work of the day where you took the ashes from overnight off the Mizbeach and you put them in a special place, right? And Truma literally here means like Truma, like you're taking a portion from the Deshen. That was done before Alot HaShachar, right? That was done at the time of Krot HaGever, right? The Krot HaGever was usually interpreted as the cock's crow, right? The chicken called out. Some say the Gever was a man and there was a person who called out, but you basically had a time, let's say a half hour before Alot HaShachar, where you get the first rumblings of day. You go and do Trumat HaDeshen. Half hour later, you get Alot HaShachar, the light comes up and you could start seeing things. 45 minutes later, you get what's called Netzach Hama, where the sun actually can be seen, okay? Now, said Rabbi Yochanan yesterday that let's say the Kohen comes in the middle of the night to do Trumat HaDeshen. So this is before the day. Kidesh Yadav l'Trumat HaDeshen. If you wash your hands for Trumat HaDeshen, Limachar ein tzarich l'kadesh. When the sun comes up 30 minutes later, you don't have to do Kiddush again. Shekvar Kiddush mitchilat avodah, because you already did Kiddush in the beginning of the service of that day. Now, this is very strange because this is clearly during the night, right? So now how is there a kiyar during the night if Rabbi Yochanan says you have to put the kiyar down all night long, right? So Bishlama le Rava, remember yesterday we had an answer of Rava who said that in fact Rabbi Yochanan holds of the opinion of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, right? That this is Mokim Lahi Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, who says that there's no problem with lina with the water of the kiyar. If there's no problem with lina of the water of the kiyar, this whole discussion is not relevant, right? The water in the kiyar can stay there for 40 years. It doesn't matter. It won't be full for 40 years. But, in theory, there's no psul for any amount of time. And therefore, there's nothing to talk about. There's no dawn, there's no night, there's no anything. So obviously, that makes a lot of sense. And you would say that that when Reb Yochanan said, once you put the kiyar down, you have to keep it down all night long, that's going like Rebbe, who says there is a psul of lina. And so when there's a psul of lina, keep it down all night long. But when I said earlier, you can use the kiyar in the early morning, that was going like Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. Ella, says the Gemara, le'abaya, right? Where are we up to? Le'abaya, fifth line, who said the explanation of Rabbi Yochanan yesterday, Dimukim la kirebi, that in fact, Abaya, remember, explained that this was going like Rebbe, and Rebbe says there's a psul of lina. But how do you explain that? So we explained it yesterday that although Rebbe says that when Alot HaShachar comes and the day starts, it's possible Lina, because the Gzera of Lina is only Drabanan on the Kiyar, and they made a exception in the Gzera that, Krota Gever, 30 minutes before Alot HaShachar is also the morning. So if you wash your hands 30 minutes before, it's not a problem, right? But then the problem is, Kashi de Rebbe had the Rebbe, but there's a problem of Rebbe here with Rebbe's halacha, with what Rebbe Yochanan just said, because in Ma'ishna Hatam, why would it be that in that case, Mashkale, Rebbe Yochanan says you have to put it down all night long. Here he says, you don't have to put it down all night long because when you come for Trumat Hadeshin at the Krota Gever, you can pick it up and you can wash your hands. So clearly it's not underground. You can't wash your hands when it's underground. So how can Rebbe Yochanan explain, if he holds like Rebbe, that in one case he says you have to put it down all night long, and in one case he says you wash your hands from it before the Trumat Hadeshin? Answers the Gemara, the case here has to be that Rebbe Yochanan said you put it down all night long. But when you show up early in the morning, right before the Trumat Hadeshen, at that last moment, you actually can raise it. You pick up you push the button. Remember we said yesterday there was a machine, right? They didn't have electricity, but they had a gear, I guess, where you would turn the gear. It might take 5 people because it's full of water. You pick it up and you wash, and then you put it back down. So you pick it up for a few minutes and you put it back down, because at the time Alot HaShachar comes, you have to have it underground. Says Gemara, well, if that's the case, when it says the Machar Inu Mekadesh, the next day, meaning the next morning, you can't use the Kiyor for Kiddush, that implies it stayed out overnight. It was exposed when Alot HaShachar happened, and it's possible Lina. But if you're saying that Rabbi Yochanan says that you pick it up and put it back down, why would it be possible? Why would be that the case? Answers the Gemara, the answer we gave yesterday as well. When it says the Machar Inu Mekadesh, it does not mean the next day you can't use the Kior in order to wash your hands and feet. It means that the Kohen does not need to do Kiddush the next day, meaning the next morning, 30 minutes later when the sun starts rising. It means Ein Sarich L'Kadesh, not that you're not allowed to use it and that the Kior became puzzle. It means that the Kohen does not need to purify himself or rewash himself and do Kiddush again. So that is the halacha that we're interpreting of Rebbe Yochanan. Says the Gemara now, again, around 10 lines from the top of Daf Chaf Aleph and Bet. I know this is very confusing. Just stop me if it's confused. We're almost done. But ask the Gemara, L'meimra, what this then implies is that if you are, remember, you take the Kiyar, you put it underground before the sunset, because Rabbi Yochanan says there's a gzera of shikul. You have to do that, right? And then it goes underground. The Kohen shows up in the morning to do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim when it's still night, when he's doing Trumat Hadeshen. He picks it up, he washes his hands and his feet, and he puts it back underground, right? The problem, of course, is that at nighttime, you're not allowed to do matirim. You're not allowed to put the blood on the mizbeach. So you're saying now that the Kohen who washed his hands during the night from the Kior does not have to rewash them when the day starts, and he can go work on the Mizbeach, which means that although he washed his hands at a time when you can only do the Evarim, you can only burn the parts, he's allowed to do Matirim, which is the opinion of Reb Chisda. When Memra, what you see from Reb Yochanan is the Matirim, to do avoda of matirim, which is avoda of the day, michsechasi. Washing during the night was fine for that. Hainad Reb Chisda. This is Reb Chisda, because remember, Reb Chia, Bar Yosef said that if you wash during the night, you can only do avodah of the night. You can't do avodah of the day. Says, well, you're right. Reb Yochanan and Reb Chisda definitely agree. The difference, again, as we just answered before, Ika b'nau mitzvat shikua. The difference between them is Reb Yochanan adds a mitzvah, a takana midrabanan, that you're supposed to put the kiyar underground when the night starts. And that is because we're afraid you're going to forget to do it the next morning, and we want you to do it at night. So Rabbi Yochanan is not disagreeing with Rav Chisda. He's just adding a detail. There's a mitzvah to put it underground. If you have an emergency during the night or an urgency and you need to use it, pick it up, use it, and put it back down. But there's a mitzvah to put it down before the night starts. Okay? So that is how we're understanding it right now. Says the Gemara now, one last question about this issue. Before we move on, we'll get to the 2 dots, I think, from here. Meitvei, last word on the line, around halfway down. And this is from a very important and obviously well-known, I think, Mishnah in Tamid, where the Mishnah in Tamid talks about the Seder of the day, right? What did they do all day long? So it says the Mishnah in Tamid that the Kohen would show up early in the morning. And remember that in those days, there was very little electricity. I mean, there was no electricity, so there was no light. And early in the morning, at but again, this is before Alot HaShachar, so before the first rays of the sun come up, at say 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. in Jerusalem, there was no light anywhere, right? The Kohen would show up. There was probably a candle here or there, but obviously a candle didn't go very far, a torch. But so the Kohen would show up to start the Melacha of the day, right? And he would come, he would quietly walk up the Mizbeach, but lo hayu ro'inoto, no one saw the Kohen because he was dark, it was dark. Lo shominet kolo, they didn't hear anything. He was one small person walking quietly in the Beit HaMikdash. Ad sheshomin kol shel eitz, until they heard suddenly a big creaking sound, the kol of the wood, she'asa ben katin muchani l'chior, right? Remember, we said yesterday, Ben Katin made this muchni, this machine, which was some big gear, moved around for the kior. And so basically, the Kohen would be there working quietly in the Azara. The people would be standing outside, or the Kohanim would be resting in their rooms, and they wouldn't hear him until he starts turning on the machine. And like when the elevator starts, you hear the gears moving, right? So when they heard the wood moving in the kior, Heim Omrim, they would announce to each other, the Kohanim, Hegia eit kiddush yadayim v'raglayim min kior. It's time to come and wash your hands and feet from the kior. Okay? Now, the question, of course, is, why was the kior making noise? Now, we think what this means is very interesting. We think what this means is that the kior, when the kior is being dropped down, it doesn't make noise. So we're going to challenge that in a second. Because we think, you have gravity. So when things are going down, you don't actually need a big piece of wood or a big piece of sort of machinery to make noise. And it goes down quite quietly because you have just, you release it down on the ropes, right? When you raise it, you've got to turn things and you've got to move things because you've got to generate energy in order to bring it up, right? So my love, what we think this means, the misalikle, that the reason the kior is making noise is because you're raising it up, okay? Now, if you're raising it up, it means that it must have been down during the night. Alma mashkele. It means it was down all night long. Now, this goes like Reb Chia and against Rav Chisda, because Rav Chisda claimed that the mikvah, the kior, does not have to be down all night long, right? Remember, according to Rabbi Chia, if the kior is exposed at night, you can't use it the next day for melacha avodah that's matirim. So it makes sense you put it down at night. According to Rabbi Yochanan, there's a gzeira. You have to put it down at night. But according to Rav Chisda, right, there was no need to put it down at night. And at night, you can use it for all the malacha of the night. And right before sunrise, right before Alot HaShachar, you would put it down. So that when the minute of Alot HaShachar came, it was underground. But it didn't need to be down all night long. So why, when the Kohen came to do the Trumat HaDeshen, do you assume there's going to be noise from raising the kior? Why would the kior be underground according to Rav Chisda? So Alma, what you see from here is mashkale, that it was underground, which goes against Rav Chisda. Answers the Gemara, you're right, but that's not what it means here. Remember that according to everybody, at the moment of Alot HaShachar, the kior had to be underground or would become pasul lina, according to Rebbe's opinion, right? So this Kohen who came to do Trumat HaDeshen, part of his job was to clear off the ash on the Mizbeach, walk over to the kior and put it underground so that the moment of Alot HaShachar, which is coming up, it will be underground. Says we're low. What we're talking about is the mashkale. He's putting it underground. It means shikua means to sink something, right? He's putting it underground. Says the Gemara, well, if he's putting it underground, ida mashkale mi mishtama ale kale. You're not going to hear anything, right? There isn't a lot of noise when you put something down. You're sort of just releasing it on a rope. Answers the Gemara, no. Putting it down, there's a lot of different gersot here, but one gersa is that mashkale big gilgala, that even when you put it down, you don't just release it. You can't just drop it into the ground. You have to use the gilgal. You have to use the wheel, right? The mechanism to get it down too, in order to release it properly. Again, this thing weighed, 1,000 pounds, right? So you have to also use the gears to put it down, and even putting it down is going to make noise. And so basically, according to Rav Chisda, the kior would be exposed all night long because the people working at night were coming and using the kior. When 15 minutes or 10 minutes before Alot HaShachar, the Kohen who came to do the Trumat HaDeshen would go and would lower the kior, that made a lot of noise. It was a very, very loud machine, and it would be an alarm clock for the Kohanim that they would say, "Oh, day's about to start. We hear the kiyar. Let's get moving." Right? So that is one answer. Lishnach, we have another version of this, 8 lines from the bottom, is that what we're talking about here is demishkale b'chumarte.
You have a good day.
To have a good day, Ken. Is that what the Kohen would do is that he would actually make extra noise on purpose. Meaning, sure, he could have lowered the kiyar very quietly, but he wants to make noise. So they would, everyone's probably done this. You can make noise. You could do things quietly sometimes, and you can do the same action, open and shut the door, or you slam the window, in a way that you want to get people's attention. And so the Kohen specifically did it in a way that made noise. So that people would hear the sound, the lishmi, and they would hear it. Ishtamakale means it would make noise. Lishmi, people would hear the noise. Beleti, and they would come to the Beit HaMikdash. And so basically the goal here was to purposely be it noisy, right? Sure, the Kohen could have done it quietly because according to Rav Chisda, he's just lowering it down. Lowering it down could be done very quietly. But the goal of here was for the Kohen to make a lot of noise so that everyone knows the gates are opening, right? The Beit HaMikdash is starting for the day. Everyone come and work. And so that was the purpose of this. And so he maybe there's a lot of different interpretations. He could go down and up, or you could stop in the middle and then pull it up. Either way, he made a lot of noise. Ask him why you need the Kohen to do this, to make everyone aware that the day is starting. Vahavi Gavini Cruz. There was a Cruz. Remember, the Cruz was the announcer, and we called him Gavini, right? Very interesting. The Gemara points out, right? Gavini was maybe the original Cruz. Gavini eventually died, and there was a replacement, but they always called him after Gavini, right? He was the Pavarotti of the stringing. So there was a Gavini Cruz, and so you had an announcement that the day was starting. Says, well, it's always good to have 2 announcements. Abei Treya Kera Avi Avdi, right? It's always good to have 2 alarm clocks. Because Shama Mehayati, some people heard Gvini, they would come. Some people heard the Kiyar going up and down, they would come. Shama Mehayati. And so that was the reason why in the Beit HaMikdash, they basically did this procedure in order to have 2 different calls. Should we keep going?
I'm listening, so you can keep going.
Yeah, I'm just trying to debate because it's not such a long daf tomorrow. We're at Gufa, we're at 4 lines from the bottom. I'll read a few more lines, but I hope that doesn't mess up tomorrow. It won't.
Okay.
Let's do a few more lines. Gufa. Says the Gemara, I'm Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. We quoted this earlier, a couple days ago, that kol kiyar she'ein bo lekadesh arba kohanim mimenu ein mekadshim bo. A kiyar has to have a minimum size or a minimum amount of water. You have to be able to have enough water to pour on 4 kohanim. Because, remember the pasuk said, make the kiyar v'rachatzu mimenu Moshe, Aaron ubanav. Moshe, Aaron, 2 people, and the sons, and unfortunately Aaron only had 2 sons at that point because his 2 sons died. So there were only 4, there were a minimum of 4 people need to be able to wash from the kiyar, okay? Says the Gemara, that's very interesting, but Meitvei, we have another Braita which says that kol hakelim mikadshim, that you can use, remember we said, you don't have to use the kiyar. You can use any kli sharet to wash your hands. Says the Braita, bein sheyesh ben revi'it, bein she'ein lam revi'it. Whether it has enough space to fill up a revi'it of water, or it doesn't, to the top of Daf Chaf Bet Amud Aleph, bavaji kli sharet. As long as a kli sharet. Now, obviously a revi'it, or even less than a revi'it, says, is not 4 people, right? So you don't need to have that much. Amar Rav Ada bar Acha, says Rav Ada bar Acha, no. What we're referring to is that bikodeach bitocho. It's talking about where you drilled a hole. Kodeach is like a kedicha, it's a drill. You drilled a hole into the kiyar, and you basically put a very small kli at the hole to pour the water towards you, meaning it was like a funnel, basically, right? Or a pipe. And so what you did was, even though the very small kli attached to the kiyar is not a revi'it, right? Or it might be a very, very narrow pipe, let's say, right? So that you can't put a revi'it in at one time, but because it's connected to the kiyar, it's channeling the water, and because the kiyar itself has enough water for 4 people, that's what we mean is fine. But the connector thing, the kodeach, the kli that's connected, does not have to have a revi'it. Says the Gemara, but how could that be good enough? Hamimenu am rachmana. The Torah says you have to wash from the kiyar. Says, well, you're right. It says mimenu, but it also says yerchatzu. It also says you wash, implying wash any way you want to wash. The rabot kli sharet, that includes any kli. Says Gemara, well, if it includes any kli, yachi kli chol nami. So why don't you also have a kli chol? Amar Abaya, says the Abaya, I'm going to stop here with this line, says Abaya, well, you can't add a kli chol. You clearly kli chol lo matzit amrit, and that's mikal v'chomer mikano. That's a mikal v'chomer from the base, right? Because the base of the kior, makano, remember the Torah says make a kior vikano. Kano means the base of the kior, because you have to have it resting on something. Just like the kano. Now the kano, the kano was part of the Beit HaMikdash. You had to do mashicha, you had to pour oil on the kior and the kano. But eino mikadesh, right? But it's still, you cannot use the kano to wash. And we'll see in a minute how we know that. So klichol, she'eino nimshach imo, eino din she'eino mikadesh. For sure, a klichol that was not had mashicha with the kior cannot be used for kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Ask the Gemara. I'm going to stop here because it just keeps going, right? Because the Gemara is going to ask how you know about the kano, but I want to leave tomorrow's daf for tomorrow, so we will stop here at a few lines down as we are on daf Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph. Finally, no, Chaf. Did I get my wrong daf? Yeah, my daf Chaf Bet Amud Aleph. Right, I got the wrong one.
Can't help you. I don't have my Gemara in front of me.
No. And we will continue this discussion tomorrow because I don't want to go to the 2 dots. I'll be halfway down the daf. The discussion tomorrow is about whether the base of the kior, which is obviously not made for washing, but was an essential part of the kior, whether you can use that. Let's say the kior is out of commission or whatever, can you use that for washing? So we'll continue that tomorrow, which I think you'll be away, Miriam. I know we'll learn, and then have a Chag Sameach. Wonderful Sukkot. Wait, you're in Paris now for the first days, though, right?
Sameach. Thank you, Ellie.
You're welcome.
What?
Miriam.
It broke. I'm away the first days. I'm coming back for Chol HaMoed, and I'm leaving on Sunday.
Okay, so maybe I'll see you Motzei Shabbat. Chol HaMoed.
Yeah, Motzei Shabbat, definitely.
Perfect. Okay, have a great day. Chag Sameach.
You too. Bye-bye.